Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of the Hindu. As we had promised you that we shall be continuing with our series after prelims. So I'm resuming the series back. We have already discussed newspapers till the 18th of May. 19th of May being a Sunday, we'll not be discussing that, and we'll continue our discussion from the 20th of May. So coming to the analysis of the 20th of May, coming to the first article. Now basically I have clubbed these two articles. These were the only two articles that were important in the newspaper of the 20th of May. So this is one article on taking stock of Islamic State 2.0 and the second article which is about 10 years on. Both these articles are context with regards to the Easter attacks that did take place in Sri Lanka. You should know these were attacks that took place in Sri Lanka on the 21st of April. This was an Easter day and these attacks were what took place at several churches in Sri Lanka, killing more than 300 people. So this is one of the worst attacks that have taken place in Sri Lanka in the recent past. So both these articles are somehow insinuating towards this particular context, and so it is legitimate that we can combine these two articles and come up with a gist of both these articles together. So coming to the issues which are important, the first issue that is important here is with regards to an analysis of the past 1 decade in Sri Lanka. Now in this context you need to know that why is it that we are discussing this last 1 decade? This is because Sri Lanka was had a lot of terrorist activity, and Sri Lanka was at a civil war, and this civil war in Sri Lanka is what ended in the year 2009. So this being 2019, it is 1 decade since the ending of this civil war in Sri Lanka and ending of terrorist activities in Sri Lanka, and as a result of which an analysis is what is called upon of 10 years of peace in Sri Lanka. So the editorial that is discussing that primarily this one decade of peace in Sri Lanka is what has not really resulted in a lot of tangible progress in Sri Lanka. There is no sense of closure that families in Sri Lanka are today also feeling. This is because the people who had lost the family members, no justice is what has been given to them. A large number of people went misplaced during this particular point of time. There were a lot of army atrocities and military atrocities that took place at this point of time. So justice is what has not been derived, or justice is what has not come to the people. So there is no sense of closure, and all the events vis-a-vis bringing justice to the guilty is what is at a standstill. So that is another development in this 1 decade. Also, the issue is that inter-ethnic suspicions are something that still continue in Sri Lanka, and this is what has been reflected in the recent attack where the Muslims of the country have grouped together and they have been radicalized and they have caused this particular attack. So that is one analysis of the last decade in Sri Lanka. If ever you have an opportunity, a question in this regard can come basically if you have to discuss about the bad impacts of war, or for that matter civil war in a country. So in that situation you can give the example of Sri Lanka, which is going to be very, very apt. So in that context, this one analysis of this one particular point and that article of the 10 years on is what becomes important. So that is about this particular article. Now coming to the analysis of the other article, which deals with the first issue of intention. Now the editorial is discussing that these attacks that did take place in Sri Lanka, there was an intention behind these attacks. There is definitely a perceived intention of forwarding a message. Now how can this be analyzed? This is primarily because these attacks are what took place on an Easter day, which is the religion of Christianity, which is the primary religion of all the Western powers. And also these attacks are what took place in churches as well as on luxury hotels. So the damage that was intended to be caused was global damage, and as a result of which the message definitely had some global undertones. Also the message later, when Islamic State took the responsibility of this particular attack, then at that point of time the intention, or it was clearly stated by the Islamic State that this was what was a revenge for the fall of Syrian town of Baghouz. Now Baghouz is the last town in Syria that was captured by Islamic State. And finally, the removal of Islamic State from this particular town is what has been revenged in the attacks that took place in Sri Lanka. Next, what is important here is with regards to the Islamic State attacks. Some attacks here are what are mentioned in the editorial, and they become important for us because these are attacks in the South Asia. For example, the Surabaya attacks are what took place in Indonesia. So this is for first attack that you should know, Surabaya attack. This is what took place in the month of May last year. Also, Jolo in Philippines is what was attacked in the month of January this year itself. So these are two attacks that you need to remember, one in Indonesia and the other in Philippines. So South Asia is not something that is new to Islamic State attacks, but definitely an attack of this nature or this degree is what is first for South Asia. Next in analysis is what has been drawn vis-a-vis these attacks happening in South Asia. This is what is important for us because South Asia, the editorial is saying, is a very, very vulnerable zone. This is primarily because the Islamic State is governed by the ideology of radicalism, and largely extremist Islamist policy or ideology is what governs the Islamic State. And there is a lot of scope for such kind of, for fanning such kind of radicalistic feelings amongst the youth in South Asia. So South Asia in particular is very, very vulnerable. Largely the countries in South Asia are developing. The security framework is weaker. So there is a higher chance that Islamic State can find ground in South Asia, and that is what has been discussed. Next, what is important is a name, that is Zahran Muhammad Hashim. Now he was the person who was primarily responsible for these attacks in Sri Lanka, and he was a person who had transformed a moderate Islamist society in Sri Lanka into a very, very radical one. Now, why I have mentioned this name is because I have observed that students are not scoring, or UPSC is not rewarding much when it comes to answers in international section. So what happens is that I am sensing that maybe UPSC is seeking, or students are writing very, very general answers, and maybe UPSC is seeking some details. So in some cases, some names and some facts are what we should present. So in that context, this name can be important. You should remember that he was the mastermind of this particular attack. So this is what is important. Next, what is important is the idea of an Islamic caliphate. Now this is what was the ideology or the goal of the Islamic State. It wanted to establish an Islamic caliphate, and this is one goal that still exists. Even today, then the Islamic State is what has been wiped out. A new form of Islamic State, that is the Islamic State 2.0, is what is into existence. And this Islamic State 2.0 will also aim at an Islamic caliphate. And this is a major propaganda, a weapon for propaganda, because a lot of youth will join the Islamic State just to form this Islamic caliphate. So that is what has been discussed. Next, what is very, very important is the pivotal role that has been played by internet. And this is what has been a major tool that Islamic State has used for radicalizing the youth. We have been seeing this from the past, and some keywords are what have been given in the editorial. First and foremost keyword that has been used is direct to home jihad. So these are some keywords that I would suggest you should make a note of. That direct to home jihad is what is being offered through the internet. Also a virtual community of terrorists and radicalized youth is what is being established. So these are some tendencies of the Islamic State, and despite the fact that on ground Islamic State is what has been defeated, defeating it on the internet is what is a major challenge, and that is something that still exists. Islamic State virtually or on the social media is what is very, very active even today. So that is what has been discussed. Next, the editorial is discussing about the Islamic State 2.0, which is different from the Islamic State 1.0 or the first Islamic State, primarily because 2.0 is more focused on online propaganda. That is its only way left for Islamic State now, because already it has been destroyed physically from Syria. So if it wants to survive, for its survival is dependent on its online propaganda, which has increased many-fold. So that is what is being discussed. Also, there is an issue of shifting from lone wolf attacks to now coordinated large-scale attacks is what has happened in the case of Sri Lanka also. So this is again a strategic shift that has happened. Also, what is important is that Islamic State 2.0 is aiming at creating a new military identity amongst the Muslims. The issue with Islamic State 2.0 is not that a few Muslims in one particular country are being tortured by the Westerners and this is why the people are rising against the West. That is not the ideology here. The ideology is of setting up a different community amongst Muslims itself. These are the Muslims who are very radical in their beliefs. They want to come up with the idea of an Islamist caliphate. So all of these ideologies are what are unique to Islamic State 2.0 is what has been discussed. So that is one important analysis. Question can simply be asked that what is the difference between Islamic State 1.1 and 2.0. So in that context, you should have some frame of an answer. Another thing that is important are the repercussions for India. Definitely for India also, the rise of Islamic State in South Asia is a major cause of concern. This is primarily because India is also at a very high risk. India has a large population of Muslims, and not only religion targeted. We should not have a religion targeted approach. The issue in India is that there's a lot of population that is youthful. There's a lot of population that is vulnerable. The youth in our country is unemployed. The youth has a lot of grievances. The youth has a lot of anger, and as a result of which this is a good ground for radicalizing the youth, and as a result of which India is vulnerable. It is not that India has a lot of Muslims, that is why India is vulnerable. India has several other problems related to underdevelopment of a particular religion, and because of that India is at a high risk is what has been discussed. Another issue is that this person Zahran Muhammad Hashim, he had links even in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, and this is something that has been proven, and so India must take care of these issues, and India must have a preemptive approach, especially in vulnerable states like Tamil Nadu as well as in Kerala. Also, there are few Indians who have returned from Syria. So the editorial is also discussing that it is these people who can be more vulnerable of joining the Islamic State 2.0, because at this point of time, once they have been defeated in Syria, they will be obviously at this point of time they are lacking a purpose, and they might be easy to get wounded away, or they can be an easy target for radicalization. So that is what is the analysis that has been given in this particular article. It is largely talking about how India needs to protect itself, how India needs to prevent such kind of attacks. So that is the primary focus. Also, why South Asia is a hotbed is one thing that can be analyzed. A question can come. The terrorism in South Asia is one of the major challenges for future. So that is how this entire issue is what can be presented. A question in this regard can be asked. The importance of the article is both from international relations point of view, also in the context of internal security. So that is the relevance of these articles, and that's about our discussion on these. I thank you all for watching the video.